and we covered some pretty big developments related to the SILP housing supplement. I thought we would do just like a couple minutes of a recap today because I know a lot of people couldn't necessarily join at a different time last week. So we just spent a few minutes maybe doing that, and then we'll kind of talk about the housing navigation and maintenance program and submitting written testimony. I know we've been talking about, but this is moving, through these various budget subcommittees and budget committee. It's kind of like making its journey through the legislature and then ultimately to the governor. So we'll talk about sort of where it is today or this week and where we should be directing our advocacy. Highlight a couple new social media posts, encourage you to make those posts, and then obviously discussion or questions we can really do throughout. We don't have to have that just at the end. So I'll dive in here. So just a recap, I know a lot of people that I'm seeing on the call right now were here last week, so I'll try to be not long-winded about this. That's not repeat too much information. But the California Department of Social Services did amend their foster care rate proposal. And one of the significant changes in those amendments was that young people in supervised independent living placements in SILPs will now receive a greater monthly payment than they would in the original version. And so that would start in 2026 when the foster care rate structure kicks in. What it would look like literally would be getting a monthly payment of $2,288 a month. So right now, young people receive $1,206 a month. With the SILP housing supplement, they would have received varying amounts depending on the county they live in, according to that local cost of housing. So this is definitely a different approach where all young people across the state would receive a more than $1,000 increase. What that really means is the care and supervision rate, which was already going to be going directly to them, it essentially replaced the basic rate. That was already an increase, $1,788. But they were originally, in the original version of the trailer bill, they were receiving their what is called the strengths building rate, which was $500 for youth and SILPs. They were not going to receive that directly. It would go to the spending plan manager, who then sort of manages eligible expenditures. And we all had concerns that that would not result in young people actually getting those dollars, and that they would be sort of restricted in how much, and like how do you make it all pencil out to $500 a month in your expenditures? What if you just need money for housing? Just a lot of concerns there. The Department of Social Services definitely heard those concerns and acted on them. And so they changed it so that young people receive that $500 directly. So it is part of their monthly payment now. So $1,788 plus $500 is $2,288. So that's how we got to that monthly number. I put a couple different things on this week's slide, structured it a little differently based on some questions I received. So one thing is there will be no changes to the oversight of this monthly payment. One question was, well, because 500 is intended for the strengths building activities, 1788 is intended to be that care and supervision rate. Will there be sort of this increased oversight of how any of that monthly payment is used? And the answer is no. Nothing in the language says that there has to be a spending plan manager involved, or that youth are going to be required to spend that money a certain way. The intent of it is what's on the screen, and hopefully young people can use it that way. But if you need more than $1,788 for housing or for your basic needs, you have all that whole $2,288 to use how you see and need, how you see fit, and how you need that what you need. So that is the kind of second sub bullet there. And then another thing to clarify, I know we talked about this last week, but I think this is something to emphasize, is this compared to the SILP housing supplement. Like, are we being quick to abandon that? Let's evaluate this. We talked about different pros and cons last week. And there's a recording of that if you want to kind of watch that conversation, listen to that conversation. But this increase to $2,288 actually would provide more funding to youth and SILPs in across 53 counties. And when I say more funding, I mean more funding than the SILP housing supplement would have gotten them. And that's 95% of young people in SILPs and extended foster care. So there are 5 very high cost counties that would have gotten anywhere from, you know, $100 to $200 something more a month with the SILP housing supplement. But for the vast majority of young people, this is more than they would have received. So in light of these really, you know, large budget cuts that we're seeing to human services programs, this is a bright spot, certainly, and is something that is, you know, a significant increase from where they are now. Another thing just to share that's a little bit new from last week, I did ask a question of CDSS. You know, there is language in the trailer bill that says that the strengths building rate would not be considered income for purposes of eligibility determination, which we all know is really important because that gets complicated when you're trying to how public benefits interact. So if a young person is trying to get CalFresh, it's really important what is considered income when they're looking at how much CalFresh you can get, as I'm sure people on the call have had experience with this. So the intent is that the strengths building rate would not be considered income for the purposes of benefits eligibility. However, you know, I think the state is not 100% on whether that is going to fly with their federal partners for some of these benefits that are at least partially federal or that are fully federal. So they're checking in with their federal partners on that. So I just want to clarify, because we did mention this last week, and this is all just trailer bill language that's being proposed. There's nothing in state law yet. This is not set in stone. So we're getting pretty far into the weeds here to be talking about these things. But I did just want to say that because I didn't want to spread any misinformation from last week, that's something they're still kind of looking into. So that is where we arrived for youth and SILPs, but I want to pause real quick and just see if there's questions for anybody who wasn't on the call last week, or if anyone has sort of done some thinking and has some additional thoughts they want to share since last week before I move on.
Yeah, I just had a really quick question in terms of the oversight. So would that also include other NMDs like youth and THPs as well, that there would not be oversight on that monthly payment?
No, so perfect. That's a really good question. So this is specific to youth and SILPs. You know, youth and THP NMD still would have a spending plan manager. I know there was some loosening of the language to make sure that it's clear that young people have a central role in determining how to use those funds. That non-minor dependents have that, but youth and THP NMD would still have this spending plan manager. I suspect that there will be a lot of, even if there's maybe additional amendments, but a lot of discussion, certainly in implementation, about what this looks like and how this works. Spending plan managers, this is a new concept. This is something new that they're trying. And so I think there's going to probably be a lot of state guidance that will have to be developed for the strengths building program, particularly depending on the age of the young person, the type of placement they're in, and how they work with that spending plan manager. So what you see on the screen is really just for youth and SILPs of what's in that proposed language. Just looking at the chat here. Oh, you're welcome. Well, I'll move to the next slide because it's still one more slide on here. So this is a win. We really view this as a win. But we're certainly not done yet, even on the SILP side. Like, there's obviously the whole housing navigation and maintenance program, which we'll get to, but we're not even done here yet because you know, great, this increase really meets the goal of the SILP housing supplement and preventing homelessness among young people in SILPs by equipping them with more money to afford housing. That's great. Like I said, it's a bright spot in the face of billions in budget cuts. We are, you know, ceasing with our kind of SILP housing supplement advocacy because we've gotten this. But this is not final. You know, for this to move forward, for this additional money for youth and SILPs to move forward, it is now tied to this rate proposal, which is not done, right? So in order for this to move forward, the rate proposal still has to pass. It is a priority of the administration. It is something that is in statute as having to happen. But given budget cuts, I don't think anything is guaranteed this year. And, there is the May revise came out, and the governor placed what's called a trigger on the rate proposal, meaning that even if that trailer bill passes and there's some money included in the budget this year for it, that the new rates would only move forward if there was funding for them in 2026, because the amount of funding kicks up, right? Right now, we're just going to automate the rates and the state's foster care payment systems. We're going to do a few things, right? But once these rates start getting paid, each year that kind of we proceed here, there's more money associated with it. And so it's not just money this year. It's a longer term funding commitment. And so the governor is sort of saying, well, we have a shaky budget, no promises. We got to have a certain amount of money in 2026 for this to move forward. That is not a big vote of confidence, I think, for any of us. And so the legislature and advocates are, pushing for removing this trigger. This would be a really important thing to add to our sort of talking points for advocacy. If we want this additional money for youth and SILPs to move forward, is to push for the governor to remove the trigger from the rates system. So I just wanted to, or the rates structure, the rates proposal. So I wanted to highlight that because that is sort of that's very relevant to young people being better resourced that are in SILPs. And, there's a lot of discussion still happening with the rate structure, and there's a lot of changes people still want to see made. And I think people should continue to ask for those changes. We should continue to make this as good as it can possibly be. But I think the top priority does have to be getting the trigger removed, or else none of this matters. None of it materializes. And we're back at square one. So I'm going to pause there and then see if there's thoughts or questions. I know several people on the call are very involved in this. They may have things to share, things to add. And then after that, we'll move on to housing navigation and maintenance program.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So do we currently know of any hearings that are coming up that are going to be publicly open that we can attend and talk about this?
Yeah, so I'll the next slide, I believe, has some of that information. And so what I'll do is I will answer that question on the next slide because it'll be easier because I'll have the visuals. So I'll put pause on that question.
Perfect.
Any other questions or comments? All right. So as Wednesday shared or asked, so this is sort of, where we're directing current advocacy for the housing navigation and maintenance program and removing the trigger on foster care rates. I kind of split this up by these three entities. I thought that would maybe be the easiest way to look at it because they're moving at different paces and they have different deadlines. Well, the Assembly and the Senate don't, but we're moving at different paces. So on the Assembly side, subcommittees appear to have had final hearing, and I'm saying appear because things have been canceled and changed. And so, this is a process that could, things could change tomorrow, potentially a new hearing could get scheduled. So, but this is what we know today. Subcommittees had what looked like final hearings this week in the Assembly, and the full budget committee, there is a hearing scheduled on May 30th, and it is listed, it says, 2024 budget. So that is like the hearing. Could get canceled, it could change, but as of now, that is what I see on the schedule. So, we'll on the Assembly side, we're now kind of moving our advocacy to direct it at the budget chair of the full budget committee chair for the Assembly, which is Jesse Gabriel, Assembly member Jesse Gabriel. We will, given that this hearing looks like it's going to be next Thursday, we'll email a link to written testimony to folks early next week, probably Tuesday, so that people can get those in around the same time that the hearing is happening, sort of within a couple day window. And you can also call. We can also send information about that. And you can also attend any of these hearings. We will email sort of any information because these things they're almost changing daily. I'm just looking at the schedules daily, looking at any agendas posted. We will be in email communication with people as things continue to take shape. So what I have in orange are, by the way, if you're wondering why are those orange, those are the most sort of immediate things that are happening. The other things are a little further down the line. On the Senate side, it appears the subcommittees are continuing to meet into the next week. We originally had heard they were going to sort of close out this week, but bunch of hearings were canceled and I'm seeing them now rescheduled for next week. So that's what that looks like, what's happening there. I know we've been, I think, saying this now for a number of days. You can still submit, because of these reschedules, you can still submit the written testimony to Senate Budget Subcommittee Chair Padilla, Stephen Padilla, between now and I'd say the 29th, because there is a hearing scheduled on the 30th, just trying to be safe with timelines here, on Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program. He is the chair of the subcommittee that is over sort of housing and homelessness, essentially. So that is specifically for him, it would be Housing Navigation Maintenance Program. Then once things move out of the subcommittees and move into the full budget committee in the Senate, we'll be directing our advocacy toward, Chair Senator Wiener, who is the chair of the full budget committee in the Senate. And so again, we will notify folks once that sort of shift happens, and you can start calling his office. You can send written testimony when that happens. The governor, that's further off, but I wanted to have it on here because I just feel like we're getting toward this final stretch and I want to keep sort of the context alive here. We'll want to reach out to the governor's office on both of these issues, really after the legislature releases their budget, because then that's when, really when these real negotiations have to happen between, they have to work out their differences. And there's got to be a final budget. And so we want to, hopefully what we will see is that we'd be in this, the things that we care about will be in the Senate and the Assembly's budget. They'll come to an agreement together, and then that would go in front of the governor. And then at that point, we'd want to ask the governor to sign, the budget, assuming that what we want is in there. But again, these are things that we'll be in communication about, depending on how this all shapes up. When it shapes up, but this is sort of what to expect. So I'll pause here and sorry, Wednesday, again, to your question. So there are a few Senate budget subcommittees next week on Wednesday and Thursday. So the 29th and the 30th, and then that Assembly full budget hearing on the 30th. So those are potential hearings that people could go to. I can reach out and let people know as soon as I see sort of more detailed agendas. Certainly the full budget committee in the Assembly, like that's an important one. The kind of subcommittees in the Senate, we want to look for where certain items will be discussed. And they release those detailed agendas pretty close to the hearings, but I will let people know as soon as I see that, so that if people want to attend, they can. Any questions, or if anyone on the call has heard anything different or has any other, inside information about hearings or anything like that, please chime in. All right. So social media. One thing to share, and this is what's in these social media posts, and these are and of course I forgot to put it on the screen, the link to the actual social media toolkit. So I will I will do that right now in the chat. Sorry about that. Coming now. But these posts are about two hearings that happened yesterday, actually, where one of them was they were both in the Senate, and in the Assembly. I'm such a bad multitasker. I was trying to put the social media toolkit link in, and I can't apparently do that and talk at the same time. They were both in the Assembly. One of them was Subcommittee 2, one was Subcommittee 5. Those Subcommittee 2 is Human Services. Subcommittee 5 is what they call State Administration, covers housing and homelessness. So first, at the top, the kind of red and orange post, that was Subcommittee 2. That was Human Services, and the chair invited Assembly members from, just members of the Assembly, regardless of whether they were in this committee or not, to just come and ask questions of the Department of Social Services, of the Department of Finance, and make statements about all these budget cuts. And so several members of the assembly came, voiced concerns about these cuts, asked questions. It's clear there's a lot of support in the assembly for, no one wants to make these cuts. And so, just kind of recognizing in this post that, appreciation for opposition to these cuts. There's going to be cuts. They're not going to all be stopped. But it sounds like, the assembly is doing what they can to minimize them. And then in sub 5, which is again, focused on housing and homelessness, among other things, a really great comment by Assemblymember Ward. This is the committee where Assemblymember, Chair Sharon Quirk Silva, she's been vocally supportive of the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, as has Assemblymember Chris Ward. And that's really key, given, this is the subcommittee where this program was considered. And so yesterday, particularly, Assemblymember Ward just made a comment. He's quoted on the screen here. He said, "It's embarrassing that we can't even think of $13.7 million. I think he sort of meant fined $13.7 million to support the youth programs that have helped measurably more than 1,000 former foster youth with their stability. So with all the complications in their lives, they're not falling into homelessness." So he said that about the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program. So we want to recognize his support for that program, publicize it, we tag him, thank him. So that's what that post's about. But I just also wanted to share just the experience in these hearings yesterday, because this is sort of, it's our democracy in action. Like, this is what's happening right now, and where these budget cuts are being discussed. And, this is one layer, and then we've got to go to full Senate and Assembly budget committees, and then ultimately full Assembly and Senate, and then the governor. So this is where we are. Our legislature is certainly not happy about these cuts, but like I said, there will be cuts, and so we have to keep fighting and keep asking for what we need and want as a community. So that is all I have. Amy, do you have anything you want to add, or does anybody want to add anything, questions or comments? I think that's my last slide. All right. Let me just check the chat. Oh, thanks, Amy. I didn't realize that you added that. Yeah, so there's our social media toolkit. We can jump off now if nobody has anything to add, and take 4 minutes of our lives back. All right, we will be in touch via email. Thanks for joining, and to be continued. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Simone.
Thank you.